In medieval Europe, people genuinely believed that bathing would kill them. Not damage their health. Not make them sick. Kill them. And here's the wild part. That's not even the strangest thing about medieval life. They slept in 2 shifts. They shared beds with complete strangers. They paid their taxes with eels. And the church declared forks to be the work of the devil. Everything you learned about the Middle Ages, in school, in movies, in textbooks, is almost completely wrong. We're not talking about knights and castles today. We're talking about the raw, unfiltered, bizarre truth of what it actually felt like to live in medieval times. 25 facts that historians rarely shout about. 25 truths that will make your jaw drop. By the end of this video, you will never see the Middle Ages the same way again. Let's go. Let's kill the biggest myth right now. Medieval people were not walking around caked in filth their entire lives. They bathed, but their relationship with water was complicated and terrifying. The Catholic Church warned that opening your pores in hot water could let disease enter your soul. After the Black Death swept through Europe and killed 1/3 of the population, many physicians concluded that bathing had caused the plague by opening the skin to infection. So people stopped. They wiped down with cloth. They used perfumes and powders. Wealthy nobles changed their linen shirts multiple times a day as a form of dry cleaning. Cleanliness existed, it just looked nothing like a shower. Before you gag, there's actual science behind this. Urine contains ammonia, which is a natural whitening agent. Romans used imported Portuguese urine as mouthwash, and this practice carried deep into medieval Europe. Wealthy people also used mixtures of ground bones, charcoal, and ash to scrub their teeth. Did it work? Surprisingly, yes, medieval skeletons often show less tooth decay than modern humans, largely because they consumed almost no refined sugar. Their dental hygiene was bizarre by our standards. But it wasn't stupid. Headache? Bleed. Fever? Bleed. Feeling sad? Definitely bleed. Medieval medicine was dominated by the theory of the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. When you were sick, it meant one of these fluids was out of balance. The solution: remove the excess blood using leeches, lancets, or surgical cuts. Barber surgeons performed this on the street. Monasteries had dedicated bleeding schedules for monks. Even when patients visibly weakened, doctors doubled down. Bloodletting remained mainstream medical practice all the way into the 1800s. It almost certainly killed more people than it saved, including, historians believe, George Washington. Lying flat to sleep, the position every single person reading this uses, was considered medically dangerous in medieval times. Physicians warned that lying horizontal allowed blood to rush to the head, causing nightmares, illness, and even sudden death. So medieval people slept propped up at a 45-degree angle, supported by large bolsters and pillows. Beds were shorter than ours for exactly this reason. When you see a short medieval bed in a museum and think, did they have tiny people back then? No, they slept sitting. Strange? Absolutely. But to them, lying flat was the bizarre choice. Lice were so universal in medieval life that removing them from each other's hair was considered an act of intimacy and care, like grooming in primates. Mothers picked lice from their children's heads in public. Friends did it for each other. Noblewomen had servants dedicated to the task. There was no shame, no stigma. Lice were simply part of life like weather. The real status symbol wasn't being lice-free. It was having someone who cared enough to remove them for you. Medieval Europe had no refrigeration. Meat spoiled. So surely they used spices to cover the taste of rotten food. Right? Wrong. That's a popular myth. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg were extraordinarily expensive, shipped from Asia along dangerous trade routes. Using them didn't hide bad food. It announced your wealth. Serving a dish swimming in pepper told your guests, I am powerful. I am rich. I have connections to the East. Rotten meat was simply thrown away. Even poor people knew the difference. Spices were medieval Ferraris on a dinner plate. Hollywood shows medieval peasants eating gray slop and stale bread. Reality was more interesting. A typical peasant diet included dark bread, peas, beans, turnips, onions, cabbage, eggs, cheese, and seasonal fruits. They foraged for mushrooms, berries, and herbs. They fished local rivers. They kept chickens. Was it gourmet? No. Was it nutritionally diverse? More than you'd expect. The real problem wasn't variety, it was quantity. Famine was the true enemy. When harvests failed, people starved. But in good years, the medieval peasant table was surprisingly wholesome. Water in medieval Europe was frequently contaminated. Rivers ran through cities filled with human waste, animal carcasses, and industrial runoff from tanneries and dye works. Drinking untreated water was genuinely dangerous. The solution: the weak, low-alcohol ale was brewed and consumed by men, women, and children from morning to night. It was safer than water because the brewing process killed bacteria. Monasteries served ale at breakfast. Schools served it to students. A medieval child's daily ale consumption would shock modern parents, but it kept them alive. Medieval economies were not fully monetized. Cash was scarce, especially in rural areas. So taxes, rents, and debts were paid in goods. The Domesday Book, England's great 1086 census, records rents paid in EELS by the thousands. The town of wherever-on-river might owe its lord 1,000 EELS per year. Farmers paid in grain, poultry, pigs, and labor. Lords accepted it all. EELS were particularly prized because they were nutritious, abundant, and easy to transport. Imagine filing your tax return today and shipping a barrel of EELS to the government. That was Tuesday in 1150. When a Byzantine princess brought a golden fork to Venice in the 11th century, the local clergy were horrified. God gave humans fingers to eat with, they argued. Using an artificial instrument was an act of arrogance against divine design. When she died shortly after of plague, it was widely seen as God's punishment for her fork-using arrogance. Forks remained rare and controversial in Western Europe for centuries. Spoons and knives were acceptable. Fingers were holy. The fork was a symbol of dangerous foreign decadence. Today you use one at every meal without a second thought. This is one of the most fascinating lost human behaviors ever documented. Before artificial lighting, people didn't sleep in one long 8-hour block. They slept in 2 separate shifts. The first sleep lasted from dusk until around midnight. Then people woke up for an hour or two, called the watch or wakeful hour. They prayed, had sex, talked, read by candlelight, or visited neighbors. Then they went back for their second sleep until dawn. This was completely normal for thousands of years. It only disappeared when gas lighting in the 1800s extended the evening, pushing both sleeps together. Your broken sleep might actually be your body remembering something ancient. Privacy was a concept that simply did not exist for most medieval people. Even in relatively comfortable households, everyone, parents, children, grandparents, servants, and sometimes livestock in winter, shared a single main room called the hall. Beds were luxury items. The poor slept on straw pallets on the floor. Wealthier families had a bed, but that bed was shared. The idea of a personal bedroom was a privilege reserved for the very highest levels of nobility. Personal space? Medieval people would find the concept completely baffling. When medieval travelers stopped at an inn, they didn't get a private room. They got a spot in a bed. Inns had large beds, sometimes sleeping for 5 or 6 strangers simultaneously. You climbed in beside whoever was already there. Men, women, merchants, pilgrims, all sharing. There was no expectation of privacy and no social stigma. It was simply practical. Beds were expensive. Space was limited. Body heat was necessary in winter. If you were traveling and someone offers you a spot in a warm bed tonight, medieval logic says you say thank you and shuffle over. Medieval peasants had no Saturday off, no Sunday lie-in, no concept of a weekend in the modern sense. But, and this is enormous, the Catholic Church calendar was packed with saints' days, feast days, and religious festivals that legally required no work. Historians estimate medieval laborers enjoyed between 100 and 170 non-working days per year. Certain saints demanded celebration with food, drink, and rest. Harvest festivals lasted days. Easter was a week. In terms of total days off per year, a medieval peasant may have had more rest days than a modern office worker. just distributed very differently. The medieval world was enormous, but most people experienced almost none of it. The vast majority of peasants were born, lived, worked, married, raised children, grew old, and died within a radius of roughly 20 miles. The next village was a major journey. A city was a once-in-a-lifetime adventure. Pilgrimage to a distant shrine was a radical, life-changing act. Their world was their village, their fields, their church, their neighbors. Everything beyond the horizon was rumor, legend, and monster-filled imagination. The earth was flat not because they believed bad science, but because they had never seen enough of it to know otherwise. This is not a joke. Medieval courts regularly prosecuted animals for crimes. Pigs were the most common defendants, often charged with attacking or killing children. They were given formal trials with legal representation, presented before a judge, and if found guilty, publicly executed, sometimes hanged, sometimes burned. Rats were collectively prosecuted for destroying grain. A court in France once summoned a group of weevils to stand trial for damaging crops. The weevils failed to appear. The court granted them an extension. This was the legal system of medieval Europe, applied with complete seriousness. At some medieval English fairs, husbands who could no longer support their wives could lead them to market with a rope around their neck, symbolically, and auction or transfer them to another man, sometimes with the wife's agreement. This practice, called wife-selling, persisted in rural England far beyond the medieval period. It wasn't legal. It wasn't church-approved. But it existed as a working-class alternative to divorce, which was virtually impossible to obtain legally. It was informal, community-witnessed, and sometimes mutual. Bizarre? Deeply. But it filled a gap that formal law refused to address. Medieval serfs are depicted as barely human slaves with zero rights. The reality was more complex. Serfs had legal protections. Lords could not kill them arbitrarily. Custom dictated what could be demanded in labor and rent. Manorial courts, run locally, gave peasants a forum to dispute claims. Peasants sued. Peasants won. They organized. They revolted. The 1381 English peasants' revolt nearly overthrew the entire feudal system. Medieval peasants were exploited and constrained, absolutely, but they were not legally invisible. They had voices, rights, and occasionally the audacity to use them. Contrary to what every dungeon-filled movie suggests, torture in medieval legal systems was not casually applied. Under both church and secular law, torture required formal authorization from a judge or higher authority. It was supposed to be a last resort when evidence was unclear. It was prohibited for children, the elderly, pregnant women, and nobility in many jurisdictions. Was it abused? Absolutely. Did it happen far more than it should have? Yes. But the image of medieval torturers gleefully working without oversight is largely myth. There were rules, often broken but genuinely written down and argued over. Before jury trials became standard, many medieval courts used trial by ordeal to determine guilt. The logic was simple and terrifying. God knows the truth, so let God reveal it. Accused criminals plunged their hands into boiling water and retrieved a stone. If the wound healed cleanly within 3 days, God had declared innocence. Others walked across red-hot plowshares barefoot, or were thrown into water. Sinking meant innocent. God accepted them. Floating meant guilty. The pure water rejected them. You were then drowned for being guilty of the crime you just proved you didn't commit. Medieval legal logic was something else entirely. Medieval Europeans associated black cats, and eventually all cats, with witchcraft and the devil. Pope Gregory IX declared cats diabolical in 1233, triggering mass killings of cats across Europe. Cats were burned, drowned, and thrown from buildings during festivals. Here's the devastating consequence. Cats eat rats. Rats carry fleas. Fleas carry the bubonic plague. By systematically eliminating their best natural rat control, medieval Europeans directly contributed to the conditions that allowed the Black Death to explode across the continent and kill 50 million people. A superstition about cats may have helped cause the greatest catastrophe in human history. Today you sneeze and someone says, "Bless you," out of polite reflex. In medieval times, that blessing was deadly serious. Sneezing was believed to momentarily expel the soul from the body, creating a window of vulnerability where evil spirits could enter. "God bless you" was a genuine, protective prayer, not a social nicety. Pope Gregory I is credited with making it a formal Christian response during a plague outbreak, believing the sneeze could be an early plague symptom. For medieval people, a sneeze wasn't an inconvenience. It was a brief, terrifying brush with spiritual danger. Mirrors were rare, expensive, and deeply suspicious objects in medieval life. Reflective surfaces were associated with vanity, a deadly sin, and many believed they could function as windows to the demonic world. Magic mirrors appeared in folklore as tools of witches and sorcerers. The idea that breaking a mirror brings 7 years of bad luck traces directly to this medieval belief that mirrors held spiritual power. Some people refused to keep mirrors in their homes. Others covered them at night. The mirror that hangs innocently in your hallway would have been viewed as a dangerous luxury by your medieval ancestor. Medieval dietary theory, based on ancient Greek medicine, classified all foods as either hot, cold, wet, or dry. Eating foods of opposing qualities in the same meal was considered medically catastrophic. Hot meat with cold salad? Dangerous imbalance. Warm wine with cold fruit? Potentially fatal. Physicians wrote detailed guides on the correct ordering and combination of foods to maintain humoral balance. Before eating, wealthy nobles consulted these guides seriously. This wasn't folk superstition, it was the cutting-edge medical science of the era, taught at universities, endorsed by the most educated minds in Europe. And it was completely wrong. Here's the biggest myth of all. The term Dark Ages was invented by Renaissance scholars who wanted to make themselves look brilliant by contrast. But medieval Europe was not dark. It was the age of the great Gothic cathedrals, engineering masterpieces built without computers or cranes. It produced Dante, Chaucer, and Thomas Aquinas. Universities were founded: Bologna, Oxford, Paris. Advances in agriculture, metallurgy, and clockmaking laid the groundwork for the Industrial Revolution. Islamic scholars preserved and expanded Greek knowledge while Europe absorbed it. The Dark Ages were, in many places and moments, remarkably illuminated. We just weren't told that part. So there you have it, 25 bizarre truths about medieval life that nobody talks about. Let's recap the big 3. Medieval people slept in 2 shifts and woke up in the middle of the night for quiet, sacred alone time. They eliminated cats out of superstition and accidentally helped cause the deadliest pandemic in human history. And the entire concept of the Dark Ages was invented propaganda, designed to make one generation look smarter than another. The Middle Ages weren't dark. They were strange. Brilliantly, terrifyingly, fascinatingly strange. Next week, we're going even deeper. What did medieval kings actually eat for breakfast? The answer involves things that will genuinely disturb you. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. And before you go, drop a comment right now. Which fact shocked you the most? I'm reading every single one. If this video opened your eyes, smash that like button. It helps more people discover the real history they were never taught. See you.